Hello everybody, my name is Professor Rich, and today we're going to learn about being a British gentleman. Essentially, the question that we're going to address today, the question that we're going to talk about is, what does it mean to be British in a classic sense? What does it mean to be a British gentleman? Of course, this is a gendered perspective, so sorry about that, ladies. Maybe another day I'll do something on what it means to be a British lady, but today we're going to talk about a British gentleman. Now, on your screens, you can see the title says 19th Century British Elite Etiquette. However, I'm not saying that this necessarily only belongs in the 19th century. I'm just saying that I think this is when we had the height of this idea of British etiquette. Of course, the tradition and the history extends long before that. In fact, we could say that the heritage of British etiquette and the idea, for example, of a British gentleman is something which goes back to medieval times, back to chivalry, and prior to that, we actually have a lot of classic basis, a lot of things which are drawn from the ancient Greek influence, the influence of the Romans. We have ideas like Stoicism, which have both Greek and Roman input. Stoicism coming into the stiff upper lip. Have you heard of that? The classic British stiff upper lip. So we are going to be talking about that and many other things. And as we go, I will try and provide some English definitions for the English vocabulary involved. So let's begin with one of those, shall we? Let's begin with a little definition here. And we're going to have the first definition of etiquette. So what is etiquette? Etiquette is essentially how to be polite. We could think of etiquette as being those kind of rules in our head which define how to be polite. And of course, polite is like a combination of educated, respectful, and civilized. Crucially, civilized. May I say a quick hello to everyone who's joining us live. Hello to Delani as Manjula. Hello to Sleepwalker. Hello, Sylvia. Hello, Tetsuro. Hello, Manuel Gordillo. Hello, Tetsuro again. And okay, let's move on. Hello to everybody. And hello if you're watching this class later. So we're going to start with the gentleman's demeanor. And of course, the first question you might ask here is, what exactly is demeanor and why have you spelt it with O-U-R at the end? So, of course, this is the British spelling. That would make sense as we're talking about classic British etiquette for gentlemen. The Americans will spell this word with O-R at the end. And that, of course, applies to pretty much every word with O-R or O-U-R at the end, at least. Certainly the nouns. So the gentleman's demeanor. What is a demeanor? Does anyone in chat know? What do I mean by a demeanor? So demeanor is actually how to act with other people. That is your demeanor. We use the possessive. His demeanor, your demeanor, my demeanor. He has a nice demeanor. I don't like your demeanor. So demeanor, it's like your, how friendly, how unfriendly are you being? How exactly are you acting with other people? This is your demeanor. So we're going to talk about how gentlemen should act with other people. Starting off, grace and dignity, self-control at all times. So we've got some very complex words here, grace and dignity. And I think that even English speakers would find it a little challenging to define exactly what grace is and what dignity is. And we might indeed have whole lectures talking about what exactly is grace and what exactly is dignity. So grace, simply put, grace is a smoothness. It's being smooth. If we say graceful, and this is not smooth in a negative sense, of course, because we can think of smooth being a bit kind of negative. It's kind of like, hey, hello there, I'm smooth. You know, it got kind of a negative reputation, maybe in the 80s, round about that time, started to get this negative idea of smooth. But this is a nice smoothness. Smoothness as in not jagged. So how does a gentleman act to other people with grace in a smooth way, not in a jerky way? Not like, you get out, right? That's not graceful, is it? That's not smooth. So a gentleman should be smooth and graceful. And then we have this idea of dignity. Dignity. Dignity is often tied to respect. And in fact, dignity is the quality of being worthy of respect. So having dignity means that you are you're being a thing worthy of respect. So you're doing something worthy of respect. That is dignity. A lack of dignity indicates something not worthy of respect. Worthy here means that it is earned, it deserves. So dignity means that it deserves respect. This guy deserves respect. He has a lot of dignity. He is dignified. So grace and dignity, smoothness and deserving of respect. And we have this idea of self-control. We'll talk a bit more about self-control soon. I want to add that the things that I'm talking about here were classically taught in Britain and still are a little, but not so much. But in the past, these were valued very highly. And I think it's a little bit of a shame that in the modern world, we've moved away from these classic ideas. Why do we think that we know better just because of our fancy technology? When in the 19th century, they were using ideas from 2,000 years ago they were using those ideas in order to create a well-functioning society with highly educated, respectful, graceful gentlemen at the top. And that was, they were doing that in the 19th century based on ideas from 2,000 years ago. And yet modern Britain, to a large extent, we've taken these ideas, thrown them away. That's a real shame. So let's move on. Grace and dignity. What comes next? The stiff upper lip. So I talked about self-control. You may have heard of the stiff upper lip. People in chats, do you know about the stiff upper lip and what do you think it means? So the stiff upper lip is strongly associated with being British. And I think really in World War I and II, the reputation for the British as having a stiff upper lip spread around the world. The Europeans started to get a fresh idea of us having this stiff upper lip, and the Americans as well. They love this idea of the British having a stiff upper lip. Stiff upper lip. Stiff upper lip, old boy. Stiff upper lip, old chap. Stiff upper lip. So, essentially, having a stiff upper lip means don't complain, don't whinge, don't moan. Just keep your lip stiff, right? So not like, what are we going to do? We can't possibly win. It's over. We have no food. We have no supplies. The enemy has more troops than us. It's over. No. Being a gentleman teaches us not to do that. We keep a stiff upper lip. We don't allow those negative thoughts to come out of our mouth. We don't allow this complaining, moaning, whinging. Keep it stiff. Stiff upper lip. So that's the idea of the stiff upper lip. You don't complain, even when things are bad. Even when things are bad, don't complain. Keep it under your lip. Keep the lip stiff, rather than moaning, whinging, and complaining about the situation. It's ungentlemanly to complain about things. And that's a critical part of being a gentleman. Moving on, we've got posture and deportment. Some interesting words here, particularly deportment may well interest you. Posture. I'm sure a lot of you folks know what I mean with posture. So posture is actually just means the position of the body. We could have all kinds of postures: sitting, walking, lying down. These are different postures. And when we talk about posture here, we're talking about the characteristics of your posture. So what is the posture of a gentleman? You can see the little note there that says it's an upright stance with controlled gestures. So my posture is not perfect right now. I need to sit up a little bit and address the microphone correctly, as I would another gentleman, right? And looking at the camera, address the microphone head on. I remember this is what the king said to his son in the film The King's Speech. Have you seen that? Where we had the king with the stutter, and he had to have lessons to get rid of the stutter. And his father was a real strong, stoic gentleman. And he said, just address the microphone head on. So posture, straight back, controlled gestures, upright, which means up, straight. And then we have deportment. Deportment. So deportment in a British sense, excuse me, deportment in a British sense essentially means how to walk and stand. So when we're talking about deportment in a British sense, we're saying how to stand and walk. The Americans actually use deportment in a different way because they don't have British etiquette. But for us, deportment is how you stand and how you walk. So in the past, part of British education, particularly in public school, and when I say public school, of course, I mean private school, because in the UK, we call public school, what we say is public school is actually a private school. And the school that's actually public, we call state school. So the state school and public school. Public school is private. Okay? So in public school, you would learn this deportment, how to walk. Interesting, isn't it? Learning how to walk at school. Has anyone here in chat learned how to walk at school? That's to walk in the way correct for a gentleman, which is all about this idea of posture, deportment, grace, and things like that. Walking in a way which carries with it the idea of being a gentleman. So in other words, we're really embodying the essence of being a gentleman in the things that we do, including how to walk. Okay, so let's move on to communication. What does it mean to communicate in a classically British manner? So we have this idea of refined speech. Clear pronunciation. Oh dear. Professor Rich sometimes is guilty of not having that. So we have clear pronunciation and no regional accents. Of course, today these ideas have been flipped on their head, where regional accents now are not only tolerated, but in fact encouraged. The idea of having a standard for how to speak has become almost controversial. And as a teacher, I'm often on the fence on this issue because I have students who have various perspectives on this. And I think it's up to you if you want to aim for the standard, or you want to aim for a regional standard, or you just think, hey, everyone's got an accent and it's no problem. But in the context of being a gentleman, I think there is something to this. I think the idea of having clear, standardized pronunciation, there is something to that idea. It sort of becomes part of your identity. You become British in every sense. And learning these kind of things keeps a kind of consistent elegance and respectfulness to your communication. So I think there is something to the idea of not having an accent. Of course, we should probably also talk about the other side of the coin. Throughout history, there were probably many children with strong regional accents who had to suffer painful accent classes day after day, week after week for their childhood in order, while their parents attempted to rid them of a regional accent. I'm sure that was absolutely unbearable for them and not at all fun. So, hey, I have some sympathy for that. And I think to some extent it should, of course, be the child's choice. Now, as Pachu has mentioned in the chat, the regional accent, the standard accent in British English is called RP, Received Pronunciation. And RP is still spoken today. I'm doing my best right now, but of course my RP is far from perfect. Because I do have a bit of a regional accent, folks. All right, eloquent writing. So, our writing should be formal, elegant, with proper structure. So, classic training in our written communication. We're not going to use any of this hey and cheers, right? None of that sort of stuff. That's not appropriate for a letter, because when we're writing, we're going to write in a formal way. And you will, of course, see this in any of the letters of the officer class during World War II. They all wrote in this kind of formal, classic style. There weren't letters to their wife that said, hey dear, how's it going? Right? They didn't write like that. Not the officer class. And the officer class would tend to be middle and upper class, so they had this kind of background. Finally, with humour. Now, of course, being a British gentleman doesn't mean we are humourless. Does not mean we have no humour, but instead the humour is discreet. There's this idea here of subtle wit. Subtle wit. So what do we mean with subtle wit? Subtle means not obvious. And wit is the ability to be clever and funny. So here, our humor is not obvious, it's clever and funny. That's the idea. That's the ideal of a British gentleman being funny, is to be not obvious, not obvious, but be clever in how you're funny. And that is wit, subtle wit. Of course, never coarse or vulgar, so we don't want any simple toilet humor, none of that. That's not appropriate for a gentleman. Certainly not in public. All right. So, being classically British is, of course, rooted in a social hierarchy. This idea would be obvious and expected in the past, but of course today, the idea of a social hierarchy is hugely controversial and heavily contested. People don't like, number one, some people don't like to accept that there is a social hierarchy. Number two, some people say if there is a social hierarchy, there should not be a social hierarchy. Of course, both of those ideas are impossible and wrong. There is a social hierarchy, whether you want to acknowledge that or not, there is. Maybe you don't like it. That's fine, but it's there. Sometimes you have people right at the top of the social hierarchy and they will tell you that there's no social hierarchy. And that's always an interesting experience. But there is indeed a social hierarchy. There are people with more power, more money, more respect. And they're at the top. Whether I like it or you like it or anybody else likes it. And that applies to every single human society in existence and that has ever existed. There has never been a human society with no social hierarchy. Of course, I'm not an anthropologist, but I just think when a fact is so simple, we can just say it, right? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, I will leave that for another discussion. That's not really what we're talking about now. So let's go back to what we are talking about, which is being a gentleman in British society or being classically British. So the idea of the social hierarchy is there. So the basis for justifying this social hierarchy is something called noblesse oblige. That's my horrible French. Noblesse. Ooh la la. Restaurant. Noblesse oblige. I don't know if that's correct pronunciation. So this is the idea that those with wealth and power have a duty and responsibility to help people who do not have wealth and power. This is the idea of the noblesse oblige. So why, for example, do we have the gentlemen who are highly educated and who act a certain way and who get the best education? Why are they needed? Why will they get the most money for the top jobs, for example? Well, they're there to represent the very best of our society and to help the rest of the society. So this is the idea that the gentleman, in fact, the successful gentleman, has a responsibility, a duty in order to help, a duty to help those who are lower on the social hierarchy, or in fact, just people who have had worse luck, for example. So that's an important foundation of the justification of a social hierarchy. Social hierarchy is not there simply to give advantages to those at the top, but it is there with the idea that we can help everyone. And since if we can accept my idea before that, in fact, social hierarchy is inevitable in human society, then perhaps it's best that if we do have social hierarchy, we at least talk about the responsibilities of those at the top. And I think that this is a very noble way of putting it. All right, next point. So, here's an idea which might be a little bit controversial. Basically, there is an idea in the classic structure of British society that one should not associate with members of other classes. So what that means is you don't have mates who are working class. And that's a bit of a funny idea today, isn't it? I think people could almost be offended by that today. I mean, I might almost be offended myself if there was an upper class person who came along and said, I'm sorry, I can't associate with you because you are not upper class. But it is an idea of being a classic British gentleman and the classic British education that if you're upper class, you don't associate with the working class. Or at least when you associate with them, you do so in a formal way, not as friends. If you understand that. So it's kind of a structural association, but we don't go for drinks in between these different levels. And then finally, formal address using correct titles. Your sir and your mister and so on. We're not going to start using people's first name unless we're on very good terms with them. This again, another very classic idea of British society. And as you may well know, if you know me, I'm not very good at that. I'm not a very formal guy. But I have to admit that as I get older, I start to become a little bit more formal. All right, moving on. Hello, the men and the ladies. So here we have chivalry and courtesy. What's all that about? Hat tipping. Now, these days in modern Britain, not a lot of people wear hats. And when they do, the hats tend to be quite informal and a bit of a mess, including my own. But in the past, people did wear hats, and hats were almost like a uniform. You wore a hat, which was part of your status. And here the idea of hat tipping, which is tipping your hat like this. Hat tipping is something you would do to ladies and superiors. So it's an acknowledgement of respect. Tipping the hat. Door opening. Always open the door for women and elders. If there is a gentleman around, then an elder or a woman should not have to open the door. What do you guys think about that? Is it a bit old-fashioned, or should we bring it back? What do you think about the idea of door opening? Is it respectful? Or is it patronizing? Sylvia loves it. Sleepwalker says it still exists. We're fighting for it, Sleepwalker. We'll fight to keep it alive. Bring it back. All right. So it's very popular in my chat. Now, I know, interestingly enough, my audience is a little bit more heavily female. So there's about 60% of the channel, 60% of the people who watch this channel are women. And in my experience, women actually really like this idea. Normally what you hear about it, when you hear negative opinions, it's normally men saying they don't want to be, considered sexist or patronizing or whatever. So that's the thing you hear the most. That almost with men, there's kind of a fear of people thinking that they're being too patronizing or something like that. I don't know where that comes from, but it comes from somewhere. Someone scared them. Someone scared the men, ladies. Sorry. I don't know why, but it happened. And you do hear it a lot, actually. But yeah, maybe we should bring it back. We should teach this to children, right? Do it. Proper greetings. So are we bowing? Are we bowing or are we shaking the hands? For example, depending on the situation, that will be different things. You don't shake the hands with everybody. And of course, class comes into that, and gender comes into that as well. Let's talk about dining protocol. So I talked about this recently, so we won't talk about it too much. But there are some important things to know. We've got the cutlery. So the cutlery are the utensils which we use to eat stuff. And, knife, fork, spoon, different types of spoon, different types of knife. And also that for certain courses, you use different things. So normally, the dinner plate will be set with the cutlery that you use on the outside, and you go out and come in. So on the very outside, you have the smaller fork and knife for your starter, and then the next course, knife and fork, and then the next course will be your spoon or whatever for dessert. And then that could change depending on if you have a soup for a starter, what kind of dessert there is, and other things. Well, Pachu says, is this common to all family? So traditionally, yes. But as I have said several times in the stream today, modern Britain is very different now. So these ideas they're really kind of old-fashioned, sort of dying ideas. Could they come back? Maybe. There is currently no sign in Britain that anyone wants a traditionalist revival. If anything, I would say the country is still quite anti-traditionalist. So tradition is really not doing well in Britain right now. What else can I say about it? I mean, go visit London and tell me if you see any gentlemen. You know what I mean? Tradition is having a tough time in the UK right now. Could it come back? Maybe. It could. But I don't know. I mean, it's a similar thing to say, like, imagine the Rome, the Roman Empire, and then, will Italy ever fully embrace some of the great ideas of the Roman Empire again? I think some of those ideas maybe they have embraced over time with Leonardo da Vinci and the Renaissance and all this stuff. A lot of those movements have roots in classic philosophy and classic ideas of Rome. So, you can see things like that, and maybe we'll see that with Britain. Maybe we'll have a British Renaissance in about 300 or 400 years' time. Who knows? But what I can tell you is that right now, traditionalism is not doing well in the UK. People are very modern and very progressive, and they think that the new ideas are the better ideas. That's what they think. So they don't like these old ideas. That's a shame. Okay, so that's cutlery knowledge. Conversation skills. Polite conversation with both neighbors. Light topics. No politics. And the napkin etiquette. So the napkin is the little tissue that you have, right? You put that on your lap. Don't put the napkin here. Okay. Put the napkin on your lap. And if you need to, you dab, not wipe. And you can learn more about dining etiquette. I did another video on this a little while ago. It's not my forte, I have to admit. You don't want to go to a dinner party with me. I have very poor dining etiquette. I'm sorry. Command presence. So what is this? What is presence? And how do you command it? Sometimes called gravitas. What's gravitas? Sylvia, do you know? Ask the Italian about the Latin. Gravitas. Command presence. It's the person in the room that you have to look over and look at them and listen to them. They have like a pull, an energy. They have a presence. They have a confidence. They are self-confident and assured, not arrogant. But they have a confidence and a self-assuredness. They have authority, natural sense of leadership in social situations, and composure, a calm demeanor. So the way they act is calm in all circumstances. And you can see how these ideas link to some of the ideas we spoke about before, such as posture, grace, and the stiff upper lip. All of these ideas kind of link together with those kinds of ideas to get a sense of what it means to be a gentleman. Command presence. So, what is the complete gentleman? Summarizing some of the ideas we've spoke about. Got the physical bearing, which is the posture, dress, and deportment. And you will remember that bearing means the way a person stands or sits. Then we have the social conduct, the etiquette, the hierarchy, very controversial today. The hierarchy of class, for example, and formality. So interactions between class should be formal. Informal interactions are reserved for very close friends behind closed doors. Moral character. So honor, restraint, and responsibility. And intellectual refinement in speech, writing, and wit. Now, refinement, that's an interesting term. We didn't speak too much about being refined or refinement. When something is refined, we mean a combination of elegant, cultured, and fine. Refine actually means to make finer. So you have something that's fine, and then you refine it, makes it finer. What do we mean by fine? Well, fine means good quality. So good quality, make it better quality, make it better quality, make it better quality. That is refinement. Better, better, better quality. Refinement. That is the process of refinement, is making something better quality, better quality, better quality. So when someone is refined, we're saying that they should have very high quality. Well, I have to say, Sylvia. So Sylvia says, Prof, if I may, my English boyfriend doesn't speak to working class people. So I have to say, first of all, Sylvia, that's incredibly traditional. I don't know where you found him, what century you found him in. But Also, I presume that he's a member of the upper class then, because you would have to be a member of the upper class, which actually, I don't really know if there are many genuine members of the upper class who still exists. Oh, your English friend is what you meant to say then. So your English friend doesn't speak to working class people. Well, I assume that she, in that case, is nobility. Is she in line to the throne? Is she like seventh in line to the throne? You know what, Sylvia? I don't blame her. The working class in Britain today, they're a difficult bunch. But you know, to be honest, so are the upper class. So I wouldn't blame the working class for not talking to them either. No, I think I take the Sherlock Holmes perspective, Sylvia. I think no matter how refined you are, it's always good to go to a good working class pub and see what they're up to. All right, thank you very much. That's our little lecture for today, folks. So, does anyone have any questions about the things that we spoke about today? I'll just take us back to the title screen to give us a nice little... Quite like this, actually. That's nice, isn't it? So, I'll take questions on what we've talked about today, which is about being a classic British gentleman and just the idea of classic British etiquette. These were things that were taught in schools. And in my research... In doing my research for today's lecture, I really thought, could it be a shame that we don't teach this stuff anymore? You know, I think as a kid, I really wouldn't have liked this very much. But as an adult, I really wish I'd learnt it as a kid, you know? I just think, could we have a better society if we have these kinds of ideals, the ideal of being someone worthy of respect? Pachu says, do British people go to the pub and drink there? Oh, yes, Pachu, they do. The pubs, unfortunately, are dying. They're really suffering. But there's still plenty of them. There used to be many, many pubs. Every town would have hundreds of pubs at one point in Britain. Now you have maybe 25, 30 in one town. Not city, but town, right? So for a population of 300,000 people, you have about 35 pubs. That's not many pubs. It's about one pub for every 10,000 people. That's a low number. In the past, it was much higher. But people still go. Yeah, of course. And some pubs do well. However, it's a different thing today. So today, they have to cook food and things like that. In the past, it was just a place to go for beer and wine and games and gambling. But today, it's more about the food. They have to do food to get people in. But the pub is alive, just about. And it's a lovely institution. Will it survive? Well, like I said, we are not traditionalists anymore. We're modernists. And the pub is a traditional institution. So, I don't know. Will it survive? Let's see. Any other questions? Sylvia says it certainly will do. I just don't know, Sylvia. Are you sure? More and more are closing. And if you go to a pub, it tends to be old people. Not always, and not everyone, but there's lots of, the majority are older people. So people who have the habit. And so what do younger people do? They go to the supermarket. They buy cheap beer at the supermarket. Then they go home, watch Netflix, drink beer. That's it. So the pub has been replaced a little bit. People are sort of becoming a little bit less sociable, aren't they? And also, I think the fact that the supermarkets can sell alcohol so cheap, that is a problem for pubs. Also, I have to say, I think when they banned cigarette smoking in pubs, I think that caused a problem for a lot of pubs. Because a lot of people, they like to go to the pub and they'll smoke and drink, and it's like they're in the living room. That's the point. A real English pub is supposed to be like your living room. Like you feel at home in the pub, right? So you go to the pub, have a smoke, have a drink, talk with people. That's the idea of the pub. But the smoking went, the alcohol is cheaper in the supermarkets, and the people are going as well. Why the stick on your hand every now and again? No idea what you're talking about. Oh, instead of an umbrella. That's a good question, Manuel. I just think that a walking stick allows you to walk in a more refined manner. Helps you keep a good posture. Also, can be used as a weapon in some circumstances. The problem is, Sleepwalker, I don't have a lot to say about this subject, and I think I would have even less to say if I had to talk about how to be a lady. And I really think there are other experts on that, because, I've never read Great Expectations. I know the story, but it's not my cup of tea. Okay. A little bit of Oscar Wilde. Okay, I've read some Oscar Wilde. Sure, he's cool. But I don't know if you can really learn a lot about how to be a lady from Oscar Wilde. Yes, normally, Sylvia. So Sylvia said you still stop drinking at 11 in the pub. Yeah, they changed the law. So it is quite easy for pubs to get a late license now. They call it a late license. However, the default, the standard is that the pub will close at 11 o'clock. That is the normal situation. So you cannot go to the pub expecting them to open later. They almost never will. That's in the towns. In the cities, it's different. Because in the cities, the pubs obviously are like a party zone, right? Because it's the city. It's a totally different situation. The pub is not like your living room. It's like a party zone. In the city, the pub will open till, midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, whatever. But that's a different thing. In the towns, normally they'll close at 11. It's the standard. I believe they have to pay a little bit more for the late license, actually. So, of course, they need a good reason to be open later because they have to pay more for the license. Thank you, Manuel. Manuel says, Oscar Wilde, when he arrived the first time to the USA, customs asked him something to declare, and he said, myself is enough. British keep the mustache, but Americans, the mustache. Yeah, mustache is a funny thing, isn't it? The mustache is not having a great time right now. And I think one thing about having a mustache is, if you have a mustache, you have to make a commitment to that image. Because you really have to prepare everything else with your mustache, right? I respect people who can pull off a good mustache. You have to respect that, especially today. It's not exactly trendy, is it, to have a mustache right now? Actually, this kind of thing is quite popular at the moment, isn't it? Kind of the I haven't shaved for a few days look. This is popular. Thank you, Joe Rogan, by the way. No. I think that would go against the principle of restraint. Manuel said, does the gentleman smoke opium? Yeah. Much to my dismay, opium is no longer tolerated in pleasant society, Manuel. The mustache comes from France? Oh, come on. You've got to be joking. You think the French are the first people to discover that you can shave your chin but not underneath your nose? Whiskers. You know, people use whiskers to mean different things, though. Like, sometimes they'll use it to mean the moustache, but sometimes they use it to mean, like, the side bits as well. There is definitely an idea in America, or at least there was, that they wanted to emulate the British upper class. And in fact, the American revolutionaries were upper class. The American Revolution was not a working class revolution. George Washington was essentially nobility. He's not working class. These were very wealthy, very well-educated men who started and led the American Revolution. So American society was built by British upper class. So, you know, bear that in mind. All right, folks. So not too many questions today. I guess I'm going to wrap up. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you found the lesson enlightening. Make sure that you do, of course, smash that like button and hit subscribe. It's been my pleasure as always, and I wish you all a lovely, lovely weekend and a very enjoyable rest of the week. Bye for now.